Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke Academy. Joining me for a second time, I've got Matt and Drew from Inspire Advisors. I've asked them, we've actually played phone tag for a couple of weeks now. They seem like they're super busy, but I've got them today for about a half-hour discussion. I want to get the latest on the markets, but just to get markets and financial planning and all things Inspire and however this takes us in today's conversation. But I want to emphasize something again because it comes up in conversations, and I want to be crystal clear about where Matt and Drew, an Inspire Advisor, in my view, in my opinion, fit in our financial discussion. I want to put this in my perspective and context that I hope resonates. I come from a financial background. I've worked on Wall Street and for all sorts of different financial firms. And there's a lot of customer service and back office and research, all sorts of things that come to us through the firm that we work for. But Matt and Drew are not the firm that they work for. They are not Inspire. They utilize Inspire, but they can do all kinds of different stuff. So when you see and hear my talking about Inspire Insight, Inspire's biblical underpinnings, that's not the sum total of all the things that Matt and Drew can do. So I want to be really clear about that. They do the whole breadth and scope. There is no need, and I actually scouted this before we engaged in our friendship, there is no need for you to be Christian or any sort of religious underpinning. That happens to be their perspective, and they are very respectful of people who with all kinds of differing opinions. I know that for a fact, and the feedback, one last thing, of the folks that have gone their way through this podcast has been extraordinary. People love Matt and Drew. Thank you guys, both of you, for all that you do. That said, starting with Drew, can you give us an update on what's going on at Inspire? What do you think is new for 2025 and all things Matt and Drew?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having us today, Jonathan. I appreciate it. And we appreciate the partnership that you have started with us here. So 2025 is an exciting year. Obviously, with the incoming administration, we're excited about the economy and it's not without its concerns, of course, but overall, I think Matt and I would both share the sentiment that we're very excited about things. I just want to go back to something you said a second ago about kind of our service and what we provide and everything else. And I think that's a good, important distinction. First and foremost, we're not just investment managers, right? Matt and I are both certified financial planners as well as certified Kingdom advisors. And we do full service financial planning for every single client that comes through the door. We don't charge an extra fee for that or anything like that. It's just part of our service because we don't believe we can adequately manage investments without having a total view of the financial picture, if you will. And also, we do not limit our services. You don't have to sign a statement of faith or anything like that to work with us. We have clients that are Jewish, that are Christian, of course, that are atheists. We have clients that are all over the gamut of things. The reality is the biblically aligned investments that we use for our clients, they tend to also share conservative principles, conservative values, because that's where a lot of the conservative values come from, is from the Bible. So it aligns perfectly on the political side as well as on our faith side also. Excellent.
Well put. Matt, any input on 2025 and your perspective?
Yeah, I ditto on thanks for having us again. We really appreciate the partnership here. And in 2025, I think what we'll end up seeing, obviously nobody knows for sure, but there's a lot of distortions in the market. There's a lot of concentration in the top 10 in the S&P 500. We do think that obviously no guarantees, but we think that will normalize. What goes up will come down. Other things that we're working on, and we've had some great wins last year, and there's always work to do. So even though we have had some wins, it's just staying steadfast in the pressure that we're putting on companies to make adjustments, make changes. So we've done a lot of both Drew and I have had clients that have held stocks that we went into the companies and did some resolutions with the companies so that they're getting pushback, they're getting feedback, and some of these companies are responding. Some wins with Tractor Supply, with Flows. There's lots that Robbie Starbucks doing, kind of working with us in conjunction with us, not directly working with us, but Alliance Defending Freedom is another institution that we're working with. So the pressure that we're putting on these companies is starting to work, and it's not to say that these companies are completely where we want them to be, but there is a good movement happening. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Keep up the good work. It seems to me that is a counter or potential counter to the proxy voting that happens. And you guys know, we've actually had some kind of off the record sidebar conversations about some of the podcasts and some of the other guests that we've had on this program. And it's sort of a consistent piece of the conversation to talk about the voting that's connected with the investing that you do. And just to sort of put that in context for the next step in the conversation, the questions that I want to ask, anybody that doesn't know, when you have investments, if you're buying stocks in a company or a mutual fund that buys stock in companies, there are votes that are connected with that. Most people, in my opinion, I think it's fair to say most, and especially people who are buying through a mutual fund, are deferring that voting right to somebody else. What we've uncovered and what Inspire talks at length about and is also very focused on is the leanings of that voting mechanism. There are a few companies out there that do that voting, and they tend to lean left or heavily left. Inspire is the opposite. So they're sort of a counterweight, and I would think most everybody should want that, at least some counterbalance, some counter perspective. And of course, if you're listening to this, the chances are very good that you are conservative and you would want that. You want the voting connected with your investing to lean conservative. That's what Inspire does. So what do you see on the horizon for Inspire and proxy voting and all those issues, and that sort of, I guess I'll call it social pressure that you can help organize against the companies and their corporate behaviors that go left? Matt, let's start with you. We'll go in opposite order.
Sure. Well, I think we'll continue to see shareholder resolutions that we're going to file. One of them recently, just as an example, was Meta. So that's kind of a big in the news right now. Obviously, we don't think that they're where we want them to be as a company as a whole, but they're at least opening up some free speech there. But we do have clients that come to us that will hold stock that we wouldn't recommend that they hold because of what those companies are doing. But we also don't want to blow up their financial plan. As Drew mentioned, we want to look at the complete picture, and we don't want them to pay unnecessary taxes on capital gains or things on these stocks. So we want to liquidate them in an appropriate manner. But while our clients are holding those stocks, we can engage with them, and they can do these shareholder resolutions to initiate change at these companies. So that's one area. Another area would be through any of the funds that we might use. Inspire does vote those proxies on behalf of our clients that, inside of an ETF that Inspire manages. That's not, we don't solely use Inspire's products. Drew and I do use Inspire's methodology in terms of, the rating of these companies. We do use that in how we manage our portfolios, and we do use some of the Inspire ETFs where appropriate. But that is another area where Inspire would be voting those proxies on our clients' behalf.
Excellent. Drew, input?
Yes, I'll chime in. This is one of the reasons that Matt and I continue to be really proud of our relationship with Inspire, right? So as Jonathan mentioned at the beginning there, we are a separate entity. We own our own business. But as Matt mentioned, we use some of Inspire's products, and we're kind of under the Inspire umbrella. But one of the reasons that we love partnering with them is the work they do on corporate resolutions, on proxy voting, and even on filing lawsuits in some circumstances against different corporations. Because a lot of these major corporations are failing to uphold their fiduciary duty to their shareholders. They are implementing policies that they know fair well that are going to hurt their profitability, but they're doing it anyways to increase their DEI measures, increase their score with the Human Rights Campaign, which is another measure for DEI. It's basically a business social credit score, if you will, which I know Jonathan's talked about before also. But shout out to Tim Schwarzenberger within Inspire. He's kind of leading the charge there. And I want to talk about why that's important. We, in our methodology, we're never going to invest in companies that are just completely violating our principles by what they do as a business, right? We're never going to invest in an abortion clinic, for instance, or some company that's producing abortifacients. But there are many companies out there that are big name S&P 500 or Fortune 500 companies that their line of business is absolutely fine. We'd love to invest in. However, the way they're running their company, the DEI initiatives that they're engaged in, or who they're giving money to philanthropically, violates some of our principles. What we found, and I've had conversations with Tim at Inspire about this, is when we file resolutions or when we reach out to some of these board members or officers at these corporations, a lot of them share our values, but they've never heard from us. They've heard from the loud few on the left. And so they have to go in one direction until they hear shareholders step up that share conservative values and push back and say, wait a minute, why don't we not do that with the money that we're investing in your company? Why don't we just stay, we want soda companies to produce soda. Why don't we stay out of politics? Why don't we stay in our lane as a company? That's the idea behind what we're trying to do with pushing corporate resolutions. We're not necessarily saying, hey, why don't you give money to a charity that we share values on? We're just saying stay in your lane. That's the idea.
You guys have watched my shows a few times, at least in the past. So it seems to me once I start noticing parallels between different worlds, I can't unnotice them. And you guys may know that for some years I served on Ohio's Protect Ohio Children, which is a group advocating for a return to education in K through 12 and away from the woke stuff, DEI and race baiting and all that stuff. And we all know, or at least those of us who are conservative and have been paying attention to the education world, that people who go to school board meetings are really kind of socially chastised. And we even saw the Attorney General, a National Attorney General, issue a statement referring to people who go to school board meetings as domestic terrorists, which is complete and utter nonsense. But it's an indication of the importance of showing up and asserting conservative values. And when we see people fight it at that level, I think it's clear to us, it should be clear, that that is a key objective of theirs. The same thing can be said of boards. With the boards of these major companies, when you look at Ford and GM and General Electric and stuff, I think that the left have every intention of putting them in a leftist bubble and plugging their ears and putting blinders on and forcing them to not be exposed to conservative values. It's up to us, and certainly Inspire Advisors, Inspire Insight, and our conversations at UnWoke to counter that. I couldn't help but interject that perspective, having been to school board meetings all over the state of Ohio and trained communities on that. I think there's a parallel there. So I guess having said that, I'll open that up for any feedback or perspective, starting with you, Drew.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the events over the last couple of years, and the very loud few that I mentioned a minute ago, right? So we take the DEI initiative. I'll pick on one topic, the LGBT topic within DEI, right? What do you know, Jonathan, off the top of your head? I can't remember the exact percentage. What percentage of our population would be considered part of the LBGT community?
Well, actually, I've commented on that on social media, and I've ballparked the escalation of that through the years, and I think it's pretty much a hockey stick. Through the 1900s and prior, it was pretty close to statistical zero, up until about the 2000-ish, and starting in Southern California in the U.S., it has grown, and now we are hearing that just because of the constant drumbeat drive in K through 12 education, that some kids were approaching like 30% gender confusion within K through 12 in the United States.
Sure.
And interestingly, as a connected note, I'm sorry to just step on your toes here, but I can't help but mention the growth and proliferation of these gender clinics, which have an estimated lifetime price tag of about $750,000 per kid for genital mutilation, are growing all over the country. So I think in order to answer your question, the ballpark figure in today's youth is upwards of maybe 30% gender confusion. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does, but I'm going to push back on that a little bit, right? So 30% gender confusion does not mean that they would long-term identify as part of the LGBT community necessarily, right? And so when we actually think of the overall population, the percentage is incredibly low that you are going to run into somebody today that's involved in the LGBT community. Yet that's all we seem to hear about. We have an entire month dedicated to it where corporations are changing their logos. Even, by the way, quote unquote, faith-based financial institutions, we've seen changing their logos for the month of June to just abide by the loud few and their grumblings, if you will. But I think what we've seen with the election in November and with some of these corporations now dropping DEI initiatives and everything else, the silent majority is starting to come out and is starting to say, oh, wait a minute here. This is not normal. This is not what we typically see. This is not average, if you will. And so my point on the whole corporate resolution thing and everything else is, we want corporations to listen to that majority. And we want to no longer be silent. That's why this is so important.
Excellent points. Matt?
Yeah, no, I ditto that. It's just, some battles have been won, but it's going to be ongoing. We can't just, sit back and say, okay, this politician that was elected is going to go do our battles for us. Both Drew and I, with where we came from in our business, there's always going to be some front to fight, whether it's, the whole thing that happened around COVID, all the different pushes there. You can just go directly to the World Economic Forum, to Bill Gates, to whoever, and you can see what they're trying to do. And it's not good. So it's scary in some ways, but it's only scary if you sit back and think that, it's all in order and things are going to work out just fine. Everybody's got to get involved to a certain degree, and that's what we're doing on the investment front. It is making a difference. Is it where we want it to be? No, but we got to continue fighting for those principles, because if we just give up, there's no chance in turning the ship around.
And we talk a lot about those kinds of issues at UnWoke.Academy, including the intention of building CBDC, which stands for Centralized Banking Digital Currency, and the whole concept of these 15-minute cities, trying to force people into electric vehicles and away from fossil fuels, et cetera. All of these forces and all these mandates, well, there's a lot of complexity to it, but at their core, their underpinning, and I mention this often, there's profit motive. And if you can create a marketplace artificially, this is a side note, but it really definitely connects to the work that we do together at UnWoke and Matt and Drew and our friendship. I've commented on this, and I don't want to lose sight of what drives this stuff. when we see and hear all of this charged rhetoric around how we're going to destroy the earth if we continue driving cars or having cows on fields or whatever, and pushing us into what we're seeing in Michigan, is it 400 or 4,000 acres? I think it's 4,000 acres. They plan on deforesting in order to put up solar panels. Well, there are a lot of people that make profit off of that. It's the development and shipping of those solar panels. It's the installation, the mechanics. There are a lot of companies that make big profit. My point is that when we talk about fighting back and engaging socially, politically, in order to try and combat these things, the 15-minute city, the CBDC, etc., there's an expression that's sort of circulating in conservative worlds right now, and I completely agree with it, and that is the real work starts now. We didn't win anything with the election of Donald Trump last year. We sent a message, but that doesn't accomplish anything, and I don't believe that any person, Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk included, any even group of people, is going to accomplish all that needs to be done. So this is where we roll up our sleeves, we get active, we get involved, and we get engaged in the civic process of reclaiming America. Now, when it comes to the money piece, which is fundamental, let's face it, follow the money means something. Bad people are after our money, and they will do all sorts of nefarious things to get it. Inspire, if you're busy in life, get it into the hands of Matt and Drew, Inspire, and feel gosh darn comfortable that they are aligning with your value system, and that everything from the proxy votes to how they behave to how they invest your money is going to be aligned with those objectives. We'll start with Drew. Can you tell us a little bit about what somebody should expect from moment one? The phone rings, they call you guys, Drew, you pick up the phone, and they say, hey, I'm new. I'd never heard of Inspire before, but I watched this UnWoke podcast, and what are you guys all about? From that stage forward, what do things look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, a lot of people that come to us, especially from the UnWoke podcast, they're really interested in talking about the investment piece. And that's odd for obvious reasons, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about today, and, you know, voting on proxies and taking money out of the hands of corporations that are violating our values. So I completely understand that. That's not typically where we like to start, because though investments are a very important piece of what we do, it's actually not where we spend most of our time. Most of our time is spent on comprehensive financial planning. And so typically what we do, and I'll speak for myself, I'll let Matt correct anything here if he does things a little bit differently. But for a new client, it's typically a two meeting process for me at first. The first meeting is a get to know each other fact-finding meeting. And so I would schedule a meeting with a prospective client and have them fill out a financial questionnaire. We would spend usually about 90 minutes to 2 hours together walking through that person's financial situation, from anything from obviously retirement planning and investments to estate planning, taxes, insurance. We're going to touch basically anything that involves a dollar sign in your life. Then in the second meeting, we would get back together. I would put together my findings from the first meeting. Okay, what needs addressed and how should we address it? Oftentimes that includes things like financial projections. If we have a goal in mind, a retirement date in mind, or something like that, we're going to walk through that. We'll also do obviously an analysis on their current investment portfolio and what we would do differently. How their current portfolio scores on the Inspire Insight score, for instance. We might look at that to say, are we violating your values with what you're currently invested in? And hey, here's an alternative. Here's what we can do better.
Matt, does your process vary from that at all?
It's very similar, and I would say what Drew just outlined there is what we would consider a fiduciary process. We have to take we have to act in our client's best interests, and that has to start with understanding where they're at, understanding what they own, understand what their goals and objectives are, so that we can do the right thing for them, what's in their best interest. Because if we don't know those things, we can just look at beating the S&P 500 or, some of these arbitrary things are not what everybody needs to do. Sure, some clients may need to get a high rate of return, but some of them don't. They don't need to have a lot of risk in their portfolio, and they're not comfortable taking that risk. So, all those things need to take into account. So my process is very similar to Drew's, and we can get down to that point where we do, I know the investments are kind of the sexy thing to look at, but the insight report that we can provide will go through each company. It will outline, it will do all those different things in terms of showing, hey, here's where potential violations are, here's how we can clean things up, but that all has to be married to a comprehensive plan.
One of the things that we arranged for early in our discussions about this strategic partnering that we do is the impact report. So you guys have offered anybody that comes to you via UnWoke is going to get an impact report. You guys are going to run that for them. No strings attached, free. My hope and expectation and what we're seeing is that some of those folks really hit it off with you. I understand that because you guys are two very likable gentlemen with you're both CFP, and it just makes sense. But we at UnWoke Academy really appreciate that step. It's really a great olive branch, if you will, just to get people aware and looking. So thank you for that. If you're listening to this, call Matt and Drew. I'll put the number up in the show notes here so you have contact information for Matt and Drew. But get the wheels started. We see what's been happening the last couple of years. My perspective is that many of these companies, including BlackRock, and an alert reader actually just sent me a message late last night that yet another person is falling from the ranks of BlackRock. And they're kind of saying mea culpa, oh gosh, we went too far with the woke ESG, race baiting, CRT, DEI nonsense, blah, blah, blah. I'll believe it when I see it, and I don't think we'll ever see it. I think that this, in my book, those behaviors from those corporations and those money managers is similar to what we're seeing from Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. He's saying now that the political winds have changed, he's saying, oh, well, gosh, now I really believe in free speech, and we shouldn't censor people. At some point, it's just reasonable for us to call baloney on that stuff. I'm calling baloney on almost all of it. And the best thing to do, I think, is get a hold of Matt and Drew, get your finances pointed in the right direction, and build a portfolio, for heaven's sakes, of things that you can be proud to own that meet your moral value system. That said, I want to close things out with opportunity to say any sort of closing remarks or any suggestions that you might have for folks, starting with you, Matt.
Sure. And as you said, anybody that does come to us, we will, there's no obligation. We will point them in the right direction, even if it's not our direction. If there's something we see there to say, hey, this is what you should do. If it's a good fit, great. If not, we'll point them in the right direction. But with that said, I would say we've got a lot of work to do still, and we're going to continue to push those things to get these companies hopefully where we can believe them when they say something, that they've actually made the changes, that it's not baloney. So there's a lot of work to do there. Two things that I want to see this year, working with another organization called the National Security Investment Consultants, Kevin Freeman. They're pushing what's called transactional gold. I would consider that a CBDC killer, which is something that hopefully we can get in place. And another thing on some of the ownership things within the Uniform Commercial Code is some things that we're looking at doing. So there's a lot of initiatives. We want to continue to press for change to make things more freedom loving, and get things back in order.
I'm going to interject a note there for my Ohio audience, and really for just about anybody else. That organization that Matt just mentioned, I've actually introduced them to several state legislators, including some in Ohio. So there is some potential for bringing transactional gold and silver at the state level to many, many states. I think we're up to 26 now. I would really encourage you to stay tuned on that. If you're not already following the issue of centralized banking, digital currency, replacing the dollar, which is horrendous. It is the death knell of any freedoms that we enjoy. Pay attention and follow me for additional comments on transactional gold and silver. I'll work to keep everybody apprised of that. Sorry to interrupt. Drew, over to you.
Not a problem at all. Yeah, those are great points. I want to go back on a point that Matt made early on in this discussion, and that would be some of the over concentration that we've seen at the top end of the market. I point this out because I am incredibly excited about 2025 in the next few years. As Matt mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done, generally speaking, but one of the things I'm excited about is the deregulation work that is likely to come out of the new administration, and the work that, as Jonathan mentioned, that DOGE is doing there as well. Because one of the things that we've seen over the last 3-4 years is over concentration because of regulation, and I'll call it crony capitalism, right? You have tech companies that are pushing regulation in the tech industry because they know their competition can't afford it, and they can. And so that we've seen a lot of over concentration and thus overperformance from the top performers, from the biggest companies in the S&P 500. I point this out because a lot of investors are way over concentrated in their own portfolios and thus are taking on way more risk than they actually realize. I have people come to me all the time that think they are in a really broad, diversified portfolio because they have index funds, not knowing that their index fund has, 1%, one company makes up 7% of it. That is a huge risk and a huge overconcentration problem that is likely to be done or undone, I should say, over the next few years as regulation scales back and wealth is spread out to other companies. I'm not talking about distribution of wealth. I'm just talking about, free market capitalism. And so I'm excited about that for the way our portfolios are positioned, because I think we're positioned to perform very well in those conditions. But I do have concerns for the average investor going forward. So that's just something to look at your own portfolio to say, what am I actually invested in within these funds? So you can realize that a huge percentage of your investments might be in a handful of companies.
Great minds think alike. We are absolutely on the same page with that. I absolutely concur with everything you just said. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Stay tuned for the next episode of UnWoke.Academy. Matt and Drew from Inspire Advisors, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.